The most hated F1 drivers are in some case the most hated people on earth. From salty children on Tinder to some drivers who literally love making out with the wall, we're going to go over some of the most hated drivers in Formula 1 history. Starting with some of the less liked ones and progressively going to the more hated ones. Starting off with Yuji Ida. Most drivers spend their careers fighting to earn respect through results, racecrafts, or just their sheer determination. But Yuji Ida's name is remembered for something else entirely different. In just 4 chaotic races, he managed to go from relatively unknown to one of the most controversial figures Formula 1 has ever seen. His brief stint in 2006 wasn't just forgettable, it was infamous. When Super Aguri joined the grid as a brand new team, they were already on the back of the grid. Their car was outdated with a reworked Arrow chassis that couldn't hold on to a candle in the middle of the field, and let alone battle with the front runners, and into uphill battles stepped in Yuji Ida, a 31-year-old rookie whose limited experience outside of Japan meant that he had to support Takayama Sada, but he was supposed to be there as a second seat driver and help find the team's footing in the championship run. But instead, he somehow managed to become a liability for the entire team. Right from the start, EJ looked out of his depth. He was consistently several seconds slower than his teammate in qualifying, and his lack of spatial awareness on track turned ordinary sessions into hazards for other drivers, especially during qualifying at Imola, where his dangerous driving blocked Rubens Barrichello, drawing frustration from both the paddock and the stewards. The real flashpoint came in the race itself. On the opening lap, Ide lunged at Christian Albers in a desperate attempt to gain positions, and the move was so clumsy and poorly timed that it almost felt like something you would see in a racing game. Albers' midline car was launched into the air, rolling violently through the gravel trap, and was the exact kind of incident that makes headlines for all of the wrong reasons. The FIA usually is lenient with rookies though, but somehow they'd already seen enough. They essentially reviewed his entire career and the growing list of on-track concerns and took the massive decision to revoke his super license after just 4 Grand Prix appearances, making Ida the first and only F1 driver in history to receive a permanent race ban in the middle of a season. And with some fans arguing he was set up to fail with an uncompetitive car and a title testing time, most agreed that Ida's driving went beyond his experience. It was reckless, unpredictable, and at sometimes even dangerous. Instead of earning respect, he earned the distrust of fellow drivers and the ire of Ide fans who watched him turn races into a combat zone. But when we think of combat zones nowadays, you probably think of McLaren versus Red Bull, and Lando Norris is one of the most hated drivers there at the moment. Lando Norris is a guy who would be better at Twitch streaming than good driving at this point. He's a living marketing dream for McLaren, cracking jokes in interviews and making fans think he's a relatable zoomer. But beneath his, well, somewhat squeaky clean PR, and also an army of fangirls who would sell a kidney just for his hoodie, Lando Norris is hated a lot. Let's start with the biggest disconnect since Ferrari's strategy department. Lando's off-track personality versus his energy on track. Outside the car, he's all, I'm awkward and I love my fans. But the second he straps into the McLaren, he just becomes an angry Napoleon with a microphone. One moment he's joking about memes, the next he's screaming at his engineer like a guy who just deleted his F1 career mode save, and is so extremely out of character to his PR image, and it feels like seeing Woody from Toy Story after snorting 2 lines. Unfortunately for Lando, fans noticed this behavior, and with the added factor of Lando taking every inch of hate on the internet against him very personally, it's a spiraling disaster that does not reflect well on his performance, especially nowadays. Speaking of that, let's take a look at that. See, Lando's been in F1 since 2019 and only managed to claim his first win in 2024. That's on an edging streak of about half a decade, spawning in memes about how Lando was just cursed to never win a race. And yes, McLaren has had its up and downs, mostly downs, but that hasn't stopped people from side-eyeing his inability to deal when it counts. Like this time in Russia 2021, when the rain came and Lando decided to play meteorologist instead of listening to his team. The end result? A whining Norris on the radio who spun off the track due to his own incompetence. And let's not ignore the times where Lando fans really just can't justify how Oscar has been outshining him. And not even just Oscar, Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo showed up in 2021 and broke McLaren's win drought, and Lando just stood there like a cuckold on a table. And although Ricciardo was sacked and Norris performed better eventually, the exact same thing is happening now with Piastri, as Piastri is now outperforming Norris in the championship standings. Now, Norris can't take the big pressure and is now facing the same risk of being sacked as Daniel Ricciardo did when he was worse performing than his teammate. Now, we can't say that he will be fired, especially since McLaren think he's their little golden boy, especially after some of the races this season. But this kind of stuff sticks in Formula 1, because when a driver is hyped up to be the next big thing and the pressure becomes astronomical, some drivers just can't deliver. And when you don't, the hate train starts boarding passengers real fast. So let's talk about the Lando Norris hate express and what powers this train popularity. The man's got too many fans, and that's the kind that will defend him harder than Red Bull defends the budget cap. But that kind of devotion breeds haters, because nothing makes people want to hate someone more than millions of TikTok comments saying he's so baby girl. Terms like overrated get thrown a lot nowadays, because when someone becomes known for just being a pretty boy, being liked becomes the most annoying thing about you. Now, of course, Lando didn't ask for this, but when your fan base includes teenage girls, middle-aged men, and several thousand Twitch goblins, you're probably gonna get people who want to see you fail just for the meme. So why is Lando Norris really hated? Well, it's simple. He's a walking contradiction. But when we're talking about people on the grid right now, nothing screams more hated than Lance Stroll. If Formula 1 had a Hall of Fame for drivers who make you wonder why they're still competing, Lance Stroll would have his own wing. Because if Lance wants something, he looks to daddy, and specifically his wallet. The number one reason people roast Lance Stroll is like a Thanksgiving turkey. He's the poster child of nepotism. And sure, it's not uncommon in sports to see F1 drivers' parents financially support them. But this man's dad didn't just fund his karting days. Lawrence Stroll straight up bought an entire Formula 1 team like it was a toy at a shelf at Walmart. Keeping in mind, he was already struggling in F2 with a car that was significantly better than anyone else's. And so Force India becomes Racing Point, and Racing Point then becomes Aston Martin, and somewhere in there, Lance is guaranteed a seat. This alone made people go feral, because F1 fans love meritocracy. They want the 20 best drivers in the world who really had to actually grind for it, and not the guy who used a cheat code and skips past the stress of getting a seat. So no matter how many decent races Lance has, which is not a lot by the way, it's always with an afterthought. Would he even be there if Dad wasn't the team principal, the team owner, the money, and probably the HR department as well? And let's be honest, he doesn't actually help himself in the case of consistency. Like, yeah, sure, this man has gotten a couple of podiums, a shocking pole position in Turkey 2020, and moments where he's driven like he actually belonged on the grid, but then he follows it up with 5 races of being a moving DRS zone for his teammate and absolutely cock-blocking the rest of the grid. For example, like he did with Leclerc in Monaco, and Stroll either tears up the midfield or he is completely invisible. There is no in-between, and he is like a rent-free ghost who occasionally causes some property damage. Now, if you're going to be the product of nepotism, you could at least have a spicy personality to distract from the whole my dad bought a seat kind of thing. But no, Lance's interviews have more emotional range than a dry piece of toast. If you turned his post-race comments into a podcast, it would be medically approved as a sleeping aid. Other drivers are out here throwing shade, beefing on social media, or posting gym thirst traps. But Lance, he's just mumbling through press conferences like he's accidentally warped into it. Besides Lance having the eternal seat on the grid and being a nuisance to the rest of the entire field, he's also just a nuisance to drivers who aren't even in F1. Because every year Lance gets re-signed by Aston Martin, you can hear the collective sigh of the F2 grid where skilled drivers are trying to get through, but they can't because one of the seats is being taken up by a Nepo baby. We look at Pourchaire or Drugovich, who have to miss out on F1 seats because in practice there's only like 19 available. Although Lance is not a good driver, he's not all hopeless. On a good day, he can be genuinely quick, which is somewhat tragic for him because the daddy dollars are always louder than any bit of talent he will ever show. So why is Lance Stroll so hated? Nepotism, inconsistency, no karma. There's a lot of reasons. And also he has the voice like Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, we had a good start to the race, and then
But then we also have Pastor Maldonado, who is an insurance company's worst nightmare. If Formula 1 had a crash reel longer than its highlight reel, Maldonado would be the main character. When you think crash test tumbies like Lance Stroll or even Mazepin are bad, please, Pastor Maldonado walked for Mazepin so he could spin. So let's not sugarcoat it. Pastor Maldonado did not just crash occasionally. This man crashed as if it was his entire brand. He had more carbon fiber shrapnel on this track track, then some teams had strategy plans entirely. For example, Ferrari. He'd crash in practice, crash in qualifying, crash in the race, and sometimes crash during the cooldown lap just for some F1 variety. And fans didn't even look at his lap times when he was on track because they checked the marshal flags to pray that the camera wasn't already cutting to another yellow, earning the appropriate name of Crashdor. But it wasn't just the crashes that got people foaming at the mouth. See, Maldonado didn't just have any old sponsors. He had PDVSA, the Venezuela state oil company, who was basically shoveling cash into whatever team would tolerate his demolition antics. That's right, he was a platinum tier paid driver propped in by an oil-fueled money fountain that could have funded an actual entire F1 team, or rebuilt all the cars that he destroyed. So imagine you were a promising young F2 driver grinding your soul out for a shot at a racing seat, and the guy ahead of you is Pastor Maldonado, because he showed up with the GDP of a small country and a wrecking ball strapped to his car. So the hate writes itself. Now don't get it twisted, there was moments where Maldonado showed genuine speed. He had one lap pace. He was fearless in wheel-to-wheel combat, also borderline homicidal, but still you could tell he wanted to be great. But talent without control is like giving nuclear launch codes to a baby with greasy fingers. F1 isn't about chaos, it's about surviving and not to create new incidents every Sunday. So why is the hate there? He was fast, reckless, and armed with unlimited oil money and zero self-awareness. He made every race more exciting for all of the wrong reasons, making a danger to front wings, brake discs, and everyone's watching's blood pressure. But we can't talk about high blood pressure without talking about Roman Grosjean. Roman decided that it was a good idea to turn the first lap of every Grand Prix into a contact sport. If there was a crash before turn 2, you didn't even look at the replay, you just muttered, "It's probably Grosjean." And 9 out of 10 times, it probably was. He was treating every race like bumper cars and somehow kept getting invited back. Like, let's think back to 2012. After the Belgian Grand Prix, this dude had so many incidents under his belt that the FIA literally banned him for a whole race. Because even they were like, we have to give at least half the field past turn 1. And Grosjean wasn't just allergic to the first lap. No. This man had a sixth sense for misjudging the space of track there was on the race. Give him a wide open circuit and he'd still find a way to clip someone or himself. So for example, if we put Vegas right here and say that there is a point around here where the braking point is, so let's say down here is the braking point, he would see it over there somewhere. And he'd just close the door harder than Kevin Magnussen smashes Gunther Steiner's door. The worst part of it all is, for some fans at least, was that he knew his liability sometimes. The man apologized more for his mistakes than most drivers celebrated, and at a certain point it stopped being accountability and started sounding like a voicemail on repeat. Like, bro, we appreciate the honesty, but maybe try not to do it next week. And look, yes, Grosjean had speed. On his good days, he could hang out with the upper midfield. He even stood on the podium once or twice, and let's be real, there were moments where he was low-key underrated. But the problem, those good days were like solar eclipses. And despite Grosjean's heroic crash in 2020 and his latter switch to IndyCar, the F1 legacy still remains. To some fans, Grosjean was a rolling hazard with a nice helmet and a driver who made watching the first lap feel like playing Minesweeper. So why do people hate Roman Grosjean? Well, he made F1 unpredictable in all of the wrong ways. First lap pileups, random dives, and more apologies than an entire customer service line. The dude had talent, but it was buried under 18 layers of carbon fiber and shattered front wings. And in the end, he wasn't the worst driver on the F1 grid. He just was the one you prayed you didn't start next to. And if you watched F1 in the 2000s, you would wish you weren't beside Jarno Trulli, because chances are your race would have been ruined. And if you're wondering why people hated this guy so much, it's not because he was evil or reckless or scandal-ridden. No. Jarno's crime was slowing everyone down with the passive-aggressive energy of an old man doing 50 in a fast lane. Trulli had one party trick, and that was being a qualifying demon. This man could wrestle a garbage tier car into the second row. But then on Sunday, the inner grandpa would take over the wheel, so despite being an absolute wizard in qualifying and pushing the Toyota into P4, Trulli would slam the door shut and build a metaphorical brick wall behind him while lapping, like he was in an endurance race where the cars were stacking up behind him as if they were waiting to board a Ryanair flight. And you could not pass this man. He had the spatial awareness of a hawk and the willingness to defend it like his life depended on it, which would be cool if he was battling for wins, but this was usually for P9. He was gatekeeping the midfield with religious dedication, and what made it worse was that he wasn't exactly sending it on overtakes either. He was stuck behind someone, and that was usually it. The race became a meditating exercise in disappointment. So F1 fans gave it an appropriate name, the Trulli Train. And to be fair, he wasn't a bad driver. all. He was just the world's most annoying roadblock. So if you've ever screamed at your TV because your favorite driver lost 20 seconds behind a Toyota, you probably hate Jarno Trulli. But one of the people that shouldn't be hated as much is Kevin Magnussen. There's always room on the grid for a little bit of spice, but some fans like their drivers cool and collected. Others like rage monsters who come onto the grid swinging. For the latter, Kevin Magnussen exists. This man doesn't do half measures. He doesn't do gentle. The Danish driver comes in with a subtlety of a positive STD test. Kevin drives and mostly defends like his life depends on it, even if it means creating a carbon fiber confetti wherever he goes. This man collects post-race penalties like they're Pokemon cards. So let's talk about the 2017 Hungarian Grand Prix. Nico Hülkenberg strolls up post-race and calls him the most unsporting driver on the grid, and Kevin hits him with the iconic "Suck my balls, mate."
Once again, most unsportive driver of the
Suck
grid.
my balls, mate.
Yeah,
A line so raw, it broke the internet and possibly Nico's will to live. And just like that, Kevin Magnussen wasn't just a driver anymore. He became a walking Red Bull level PR disaster wrapped in a Haas suit. But this isn't just about words. It's mostly about his driving style, because comments like this from Hülkenberg were not materialized out of thin air. It is Kevin Magnussen's behavior on track that gets people fairly heated. Magnussen defends like he's guarding the gates of Valhalla, and overtaking him is like trying to rob a Viking who's also angry and Danish. This man will swerve, shove, and casually forget where the track limits are, and some fans call it grit, and others called him seriously insane. In 2024, Kevin showed us how to ruin your own race, and the race of everyone around you. Across multiple races, we saw Magnussen defend his now teammate Hülkenberg as if he was a security guard on wheels. And it wasn't some high-stakes Minister of Defense strategic blocking. It was about the bottom of the barrel scrapping with those last few points. He'd back entire packs of faster cars into oblivion just so his teammate could sneak away with a point or two. And yes, it's technically legal, but it's also rage-inducing. Watching Magnussen on Sundays felt like watching someone play multiplayer Mario Kart with the sole purpose of griefing other people's races. Add that to the career filled with DNFs, penalties, and enough racing incidents to fill a courtroom, and yet people get tired. And look, some people love him for it. He brings chaos amongst a sports-filled, pure, polished robots. But for most people, he's just professionally sabotaging races, making your favorite driver's life hell for absolutely no reason. But for everyone else, he's the dude who'll spin you off, shrug at the stewards, and tell the media he did nothing wrong, before sending your engine cover into orbit the next weekend. And I know I said that him and Hülkenberg don't get along, but someone who definitely doesn't get along with his teammates is Esteban Ocon. Esteban Ocon could put Red Bull's trophy wall to shame. He has beef with every single one of his teammates, and not for fun. Lando and Daniel kind of beef. This is straight to the point Senna and Prost rivalry without Senna and Prost stakes though. Esteban Ocon and Sergio Perez, that partnership at Force India had so much contact you'd think they were trying to merge into a single car. Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso, that wasn't a partnership, that was a cold war with interviews, and two continuously took at jobs at each other, and Ocon was saying there was no need for Alonso to criticize him, and Alonso on multiple counts called Ocon immature. And then there's Pierre Gasly, who the two definitely didn't get along well, even though you would think they both would since they're both French, which is terrible. And the only thing the two would bond over was the damage to their cars after crashes like in Monaco 2024, certainly frictioning their relationship as teammates even more. So Ocon doesn't just race hard, he races like he's got a personal vendetta against anyone in the garage next door. His wheel-to-wheel etiquette is basically non-existent, and his idea of teamwork is whoever survives to get P9. So yes, there is a stubbornness to Esteban Ocon. It's admirable in a way, until you realize it means the other driver usually suffers under it. Off track, he tries to play off the criticism he gets, even when it severely ticks off other drivers, but then on track, he drives like he's got something to prove, which would be fine in itself, except what he's proving is that there's no garage big enough to contain both him and another driver. It doesn't help that Ocon is so aggressively French. He might actually be the physical manifestation of national pride and passive aggression. And it doesn't help that his moments of success feel weirdly spiteful. Remember his win in Hungary? Great story, amazing drive, also featured half the grid getting nuked in turn 1, and Alonso holding off Hamilton like a dad holding off Costco a stampede. And now in 2025, after surviving the French Civil War with Pierre Gasly, and leaving Alpine with trauma from all of the DNFs, team radio fights, and a crash reel that could be its own Netflix docuseries, we have yet to say a significant action from Ocon this entire season, besides his occasional episode where he'll lack spatial awareness. And he's not even that bad, that's the problem. He's not a terrible driver. He's talented, he's fast, but every time he builds goodwill, he finds a way to send it off a cliff with the front wing of his teammate's car still attached. And let's hope he learns from mistakes and doesn't flunk it for the rest of the season. Because to be fair, this season he's been relatively good. But someone who wasn't good in his season was Nicholas Latifi. Now, Nicholas Latifi was never known for his speed. The man spent more time behind his teammate than Netflix crew spent zoning in on Christian Horner's face during the 2021 finale. George Russell outpaced him so consistently that people stopped calling it a comparison and just started calling it a public service announcement. When Alex Albon showed up in 2022 and immediately slapped Latifi around the track like an abusive husband when his steak was overcooked, and any lingering hopes of Nicholas Latifi having hidden potential were duct taped to the front wing and flung off in turn 3. The worst part is that he didn't even bring the car home most races, making you wonder where the profit was in Williams keeping him. Walls feared this man, and the marshals probably rolled their eyes when he flung it into a barrier again. Now, while not quite on Pastor Maldonado's level, the man had enough oopsies to fill a blooper reel that could run on loop in the Williams office building. And the cherry on top was Abu Dhabi 2021. Now, let's be fair, Latifi did not intentionally cause the beef between Max and Lewis fans, but his perfectly timed spin on lap 53 was like pressing the big red button that says do not press on it. The safety car came out, Massey made a decision, Verstappen won the title, Lewis's fan base collectively entered a grief spiral, and Nicholas Latifi's name was burned into the core of motorsports infamy. Not because he did anything malicious, but because he just existed at the wrong time and had the wrong trajectory towards a tech pro barrier. What followed were death threats and harassment, a hellstorm that no driver deserves, especially in the space of F1. And I know there's going to be so many comments about this. Please argue. I get more views if you do, please. And remember when I said that there was no benefit in Williams keeping him around? Well, that's because he couldn't even bring the car home. So Latifi was a paid driver, and that followed him for the second he set foot in the paddock. His family's financial backing, Safina Foods, was widely seen as the reason he got the Williams seat in the first place. And in Formula 1, nothing screams hate more than daddy's money, because they hate a rich underdog who finishes last place. Even if he had a decent junior career, the moment you're labeled a paid driver, it's basically open season on your talent, your haircut, your socks, and also your face. I'm sorry, Nicholas. But by the time the 2022 season ended, so did Latifi's career. Silently, no big exit, just a press release and 1,000 memes titled "Go Latifi Retires." Funnily enough, Nicholas Latifi became so meme-worthy he looped around from hated to unironically beloved. So despite being hated for his pace and his aspirations to become a live crash test dummy, he had somewhat happy ending after somewhat of a controversial career. But the same couldn't be said for Daniel Kvyat. Kvyat is essentially one of the drivers people think of when they think the worst drivers in F1 history. He burst into the scene with Toro Rosso in 2014 and even bagging the Rookie of the Year award, which looked promising, and by 2015 he was promoted to Red Bull, where he actually beat Daniel Ricciardo in the championship standings. His best finish came in the year with P2 at Hungary, and for a brief moment it looked like he could become a future race winner. But then he decided to become a ballistic missile. I see some Osama bin Russell roots here. I don't know if it's just me, but Kvyat walked so Russell could run. The name stuck after Vettel called him a torpedo in the cooldown room, and Kvyat took that shit personally in the following race in Russia, where he managed to hit Sebastian Vettel twice in the same set of corners. Red Bull lost patience fast, and in 2016 Kvyat was brutally demoted back to Toro Rosso mid-season so that young Max Verstappen could take his seat and his girlfriend and his kid, and that move pretty much sold the rest of his career. Back in the midfield, Kvyat became a consistently mid and unremarkable presence, where he occasionally popped up with decent results like a surprise podium in the 2019 German Grand Prix, but otherwise he was mostly overshadowed by his teammates. But if anyone knows him for anything, was that he got replaced by Max Verstappen and their kids and girlfriend. But we can't finish this list without Nikita Mazepin, so let's start with the obvious. Just like a lot of drivers in this list, Mazepin got his seat through daddy's money, and in this case Dimitri Dollars, his billionaire dad, bought him a seat in Haas. Nikita Mazepin didn't walk into Formula 1 because he was airlifted on a private jet, and it wasn't like his dad just lifted a few sponsors into the team. It was a full corporate takeover. Dimitri's country, Uralkali, plastered its name all over the Haas car and even in the team name. This instantly put Nikita into the same category as infamous drivers like Maldonado and Stroll, except with none of them podiums, charm, or even basic steering controls. Fans never really gave him a chance, and honestly, he didn't give them a reason to. And the personal drama started before Mazepin was even let into sport. A very controversial social media story had fans raising eyebrows on what was being let into the sport, and it seemed like someone dialed his personality up to a knowing Slavic rich kid and broke the dial. And this video proves his entitlement. The video was so out of pocket, it made everyone forget the moment that Haas was being sponsored by a literal fertilizer company, and the backlash was instant and nuclear. Haas issued a copy-paste corporate statement, and Nikita gave a non-apology that felt more like a student got caught cheating on a test than someone addressing a sexual misconduct. misconduct. And just like that, Mazepin had set off people's radars before even driving a single meter in Haas. And you'd think Mazepin could redeem himself somehow with driving, but where Mazepin went, yellow flags and safety cars also followed. The paddock had fittingly renamed him Mazepin. His rookie teammate Mick Schumacher was driving the same wheelbarrow of a Haas car and still lapped him like it was F1 versus F4. Mazepin was consistently bad and being second behind the entire field under normal circumstances. That's the kind of time gap that you would expect someone driving a rental car with a parking brake have on. And it wasn't just the pace or lack of thereof that had fans clutching their helmets. Mazepin was also dangerously aggressive, often veering off track lines like he was trying to play chicken with his own career. In qualifying, in races, and even in free practice, he had a knack for disregarding spatial awareness. Ask Mick Schumacher, who almost got turned into a carbon fiber confetti more than once. Or anyone behind him during a formation lap, praying the car ahead didn't randomly loop itself into a barrier like an unsupervised toddler. And when a driver leaves F1, he's usually sent off on a montage of radio messages, slow motion shots, or just a nostalgic commentary or celebrated donuts. But Nikita Mazepin got sanctioned out of the sport. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, forced Haas to cut ties with Uralkali, and boom, Mazepin's seat was gone faster than his traction control. The geopolitical context added a whole new layer to his already messy story, and he tried to play a victim, claimed he was unfairly dismissed, and almost considered legal action to be taken against F1, but nobody was buying it. His comeback chances were about as likely as Mazepin getting a pole position, and this might be one of the only drivers who is entirely justified for hate. He bought his seat, acted like a spoiled frat boy, couldn't drive straight, endangered others, and got booted out because his financials supported war criminals. Yeah, that's a pretty bad track record. And that is all of the most hated drivers in F1 history. Make sure to click the video on screen over here. YouTube thinks you like it. We do too. Pretty good video. Watch it, please. Please. It's really good. Okay, bye-bye.